العلم قال الله قال رسوله قال الصحابة هم أولو العرفان. هذا الدين الصحيح، قال الله قال رسوله قال الصحابة.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله إله الأولين والآخرين، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله إمام المتقين وقائد الغر المحجلين، مدح المتفقهين في الدين صلى الله عليه وسلم تسليما كثيرا دائما إلى يوم الدين. ورضي الله عن آله الطاهرين وصحابته الطيبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، أما بعد، فحياكم الله ومرحبا في طالب العلم. This is a new sitting going for the Kitab زاد المستقنع في اختصار المقنع لشرف الدين أبي نجا موسى ابن أحمد الحجاوي رحمه الله تعالى. And we're still under Kitab At-Tahārah, the first heading, Bab al-Miyah, rulings pertaining to water. Inshallah ta'ala, tonight we'll finish it off, the heading, or the rulings pertaining to water. And so far, as we mentioned, the author, he speaks about three types of water. The first is At-Tahūr, and he mentioned some subdivisions under that, which we have discussed and spoken about. The second is At-Tahir, which we have spoken about. And the third is Al-Najis, which we'll start tonight inshallah ta'ala, and that's where we left off. فليتفضل الأخ القارئ وفقه الله والسامعين يقرأ لنا من حيث وقفنا.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولشيخنا ولوالديه وللسامعين. أما بعد، قال المؤلف رحمه الله: والنجس ما تغير بنجاسة أو لاقاها وهو يسير، أو انفصل عن محل نجاسة قبل زوالها، فإن أضيف.
نعم. But this is the third type of water according to the madhab, and يعني بالإجماع, which is agreed upon. يعني that this is a type of water, or it's a category under al-ma, which is water that is najis. And water that is najis can be defined in two ways. Like how we defined ma al-tuhur and ma al-tahir in two ways, ma al-najis can be defined in two ways. What's the two ways we defined ma al-tuhur wal-tahir? What's the two ways we defined it, Muhammad?
أحسن الله عليكم. بحقيقته وأثره.
نعم أحسن. بحقيقته يعني by its reality, and بأثره, by its effect. These are the two ways that it can be defined. And sometimes you find in متون في متون الفقه that he mentions only one of those definitions. And the author here, he doesn't actually mention the definition of a najis here. يعني الماء النجس. For the first way we define الماء النجس, or the ulama to define ماء النجس بحقيقته, in terms of its reality, we say هو ما تغير لونه أو طعمه أو ريحه بالنجاسة. هو ما تغير لونه أو طعمه أو ريحه بالنجاسة. Water that has changed its color, taste, or smell by a impure substance. That is how we defined ma'un najis in its reality. And the second way we defined ma'un najis is by its effect, the effect of this water. And that can be defined as غير طاهر في ذاته غير مطهر. It is that which is not clean within itself, and it does not purify another. وهو غير طاهر في ذاته غير مطهر. It is that which is not clean within itself and does not purify another. And as we mentioned, the scholars بإجماع, by consensus, agree that there is ma'un najis, and described as such. And this water, its use is forbidden, is haram for purification or any other purpose. For it is not permissible to drink with it or cook with it, except in cases of necessity, and its use is permissible, is not permissible for uses other than purification, such as drinking, cooking, and the like, in case of necessities. Because we mentioned the qaida before, ad-dururiyat tubihu al-mahdhurat. Necessity permits what is forbidden. But if a person finds themselves in a situation where they fear death, مثلا, or something resembling death, this constitutes necessity, durura. Death, for example, a person is traveling in a desert with no provisions, is extremely hungry, fearing death. For here we say هذه durura, and he finds a dead animal, a maita. Here is permissible for him to eat it, because the necessity here permits that which is originally prohibited, that which is haram. Or something resembling a necessity or resembling death, such as the fear of a loss of a limb. If a person, for example, undergoes an eye surgery and the doctors say that if he prostrates during this time, they fear that his eye will be damaged, this is a durura. For the scholars, consider such situations akin to death. Also fearing one's honor or fearing one's sanity or fearing one's health. Yani the dururiyat sitta is considered a necessity. For this water, al-ma'u najis, it is not allowed to use it for other than يعني purification, except for necessity. And likewise, this water, al-ma'u najis, does not lift off ritual impurity. It does not lift off al-hadith. Nor does it remove physical impurity, al-khabith, according to ijma', consensus of the scholars. For if a Muslim performs ablution, his wudu with ma'u najis, his wudu, his ablution is invalid, according to consensus of the scholars. If he performs ghusl after in a state of janaba with ma'un najis, impure water, his ghusl is invalid and is considered that he's still in a state of hadith. And also it does not remove physical impurity, it does not remove al-khabith. Why? Because it only increases it. If impure water is placed on impurity, you're adding on impurity to the garment or the object, right? If someone urinates on a garment, it becomes impure. So if we wash the urine with impure water, it doesn't remove the physical impurity, rather it creates another impurity, even if that first impurity is removed. For therefore, ya ikhwata, يعني الماء النجس, it's never used to lift off al-hadath or al-khabith. And as for other than that, such as eating and drinking, al-ma'u najis, for it is only permissible in cases of necessity. Now, for the author, he says here, as the brother he read, وَنَجِسُ مَا تَغَيَّرَ بِنَجَاسَةٍ أَوْ لَاقَاهَا وَهُوَ يَسِيرٌ أَوْ انْفَصَلَ عَنْ مَحَلِّ نَجَاسَةٍ قَبْلَ زَوَالِهَا. He mentions 3 situations of water that changes by najasa. For the first thing he mentions, مَا تَغَيَّرَ بِنَجَاسَةٍ, water that changes its characteristics, whether that water is a little or a lot, sorry, it changes its characteristics by by impurity, whether that water is a little or a lot. And this is considered ma'un najis. But he mentions 3 situations where a water is considered najis. The first he mentions here, ma taghayyara bi najasatin. If water is changed in its characteristics, whether the water is a little or a lot, it becomes impure. The evidence they bring for this is the hadith of Abu Umama, that the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا مَا غَلَبَ عَلَى رِيحِهِ وَطَعْمِهِ وَلَوْنِهِ, which is rated Ibn Majah and Al-Bayhaqi fi Kubra. And the narration is weak, but it is acted upon. For the hadith, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٍ, water is not made impure by anything, إِلَّا مَا غَلَبَ عَلَى رِيحِهِ وَطَعْمِهِ وَلَوْنِهِ, except that which overpowers its smell, taste, and color, or changes its smell, taste, and color. The hadith is weak, but it is acted upon, يعني by إجماع. كما قال ابن منذر في الإجماع in page 35, he said, وأجمعوا على أن الماء القليل والكثير إذا وقعت فيه النجاسة فغيرت للماء طعما أو لونا أو ريحا أنه نجس ما دام كذلك. He said they agreed, or by ijma', by consensus, if a small or large quantity of water is contaminated, yani by the impurity, and its taste, color, or smell has changed, then it is impure so long as it remains so. For although the hadith is weak, there's ijma' acting upon it. Yani the meaning is correct. And the exception to this, ما تغير بنجاسة, the exception to this is what changes by mujawara, because it is not something that has mixed into the water. We've already spoken about this, like the masala of the smell of the dead corpse. The smell of the dead corpse that is near the water, but doesn't mix into the water. So that is an exception. يعني ما تغير بالمجاورة, which we've already spoken about under ماء الطهور. The types that come under ماء الطهور. نعم. طبعا يا إخوة يعني where he says ما تغير بالنجاسة, is there a difference according to the madhab if the water is a little or a lot and impurity has entered it? Is there a difference? Because we've already spoken about this. يعني before last lesson, we've actually spoken about these masail. For the author in reality, it's a bit of a repetition. يعني. We spoke about it where the author says وإذا بلغ كلتين وهو الكثير. We spoke about that. We divided, or we mentioned the 4 situations when, in terms of the rulings of the water, to a lot, and if impurity enters it. We mentioned 4 situations, right? According to the madhab. For water, if it's a little or a lot, and impurity enters it, is there a difference in the ruling or not? Muhammad?
أحسن الله إليكم. There is, because if water enters below kullatain, then it unrestrictedly becomes najis. And if it's above, yeah,
No. If it's above kullatain?
if it's above kullatain, and it's either liquid excrete or if it's urine, then it unrestrictedly becomes najis unless it's difficult to remove, or like a what do you call it, a communal hardship. And also anything besides that makes it doesn't make it najis unless the color, taste, or smell changes.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله اللهم بارك. أحسنت أخي, بارك الله فيك. أحسنت ما شاء الله. نعم, spot on, as Muhammad mentioned. That's the madhab now. طيب. لكن what the author says here, من تغير بنجاسة, يعني whether the water is a little or a lot, if the impurity has changed the color, taste of the water, then يعني unrestricted is considered impure. يعني, and that's by ijma'. That's by ijma'. يعني between all of the madhahib. يعني. If the water has changed by the impurity, by the color, taste, is considered impure. Then he says after that, أو لاقاها وهو يسير. He says the madhab, they say if water that is below kullatain, if impurity entered it, the water is impure unrestrictedly. And that's what we just spoke about. Even if the water's characteristics remain unchanged. Yani that's the madhab. For example, if someone has a container of 10 liters or 15, 20, 30 liters or a similar quantity of water and something impure falls into it, like a urine of a child, it becomes impure according to the madhab, even if it remains unchanged, even if the water color, taste, and smell has not changed. And they said because, or the evidence from the evidences they bring, is the hadith in Sahihain, where the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله 7 مرات. إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله 7 مرات. If a dog licks the vessel of one of you, let him wash it 7 times. يعني ما هو وجه الدلالة هنا? What's the point of evidence from this? They say the point of evidence here is the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, if a dog licks the vessel of one of you, let him wash it 7 times. This applies if the vessel becomes impure. And they said that the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام did not differentiate between whether the water had changed or not, yani the water in the vessel. Lakin, yani, this is replied, or the reply to this, or the answer to this argument is, yani, the saliva of a dog is what is known as najas mughalladha, a severe impurity, a heavy impurity, which will take fi babi izalat najasa, the different types of impurities. But this is considered a heavy impurity because there's a specific dalil that has to be washed 7 times, yani, and once with soil. And this is specific to this impurity. There's a nas, there's a text, yani, on this mas'ala. But it's not in regards to if the water changed or not. And the masala is about the fact that it's a najas mughallaq. Now, another evidence that the madhab they bring in regards to this is the hadith of Abdullah bin Umar anhu, that the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إذا كان الماء كلتين لم يحمل الخبث وفي اللفظ لم ينجس, which is narrated in the Sunan, classified authentic by Imam Al-Albani rahimahullah. That the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam said, if the water reaches kullatain, it does not carry impurity. It does not carry impurity. So they say that this condition, هذا القيد, that the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إذا كان الماء كلتين, and إذا بلغ الماء كلتين, this restriction, this condition, they say it must have a specific purpose. And they say that purpose or that benefit is to negate the ruling for water less than kullatain. Or why else would the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam specifically say إذا بلغ الماء وإذا كان الماء كلتين, يعني if the water has reached kullatain. So they say it must have a benefit, يعني there must be a condition why the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam said if the water reaches kullatain. And they say that benefit is to negate the ruling of the water less than kullatain. So they say if water reaches kullatain, it does not carry impurity. Whereas if it does, or if it is less than kullatain, it does carry impurity. And this is what the scholars they call al-istidlal bi mafhum al-mukhalafa. Is يعني a proof, or istidlal يعني inferencing by mafhum al-mukhalafa, understanding يعني based on the concept of the opposite of the meaning that's mentioned in the hadith. So this is the basis for the argument based on this hadith that they bring. And the way this is answered by many of Ahlul Ilm, they say, and we have spoken about this already before last week, that if we have a conflict between a implied meaning, يعني a meaning that's a hadith by mafhum, فإذا بلغ الماء وإذا كان الماء كلتين لم يحمل الخبث, if the water reaches kullatain, it doesn't carry impurity. This is يعني al-mafhum. By understanding, they're saying, okay, if it's less than kullatain, then it doesn't carry impurity. But then we have a hadith which is explicit in meaning, explicitly the words of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, where the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ. Water is pure, nothing makes it impure. Yani, unless its color, taste, or smell has changed. And the scholars, they mention a principle, that is that which is explicit, al-mantuq yuqaddam ala al-mafhum, لأنه أقوى. That which is explicit in the saying of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam takes precedence over that which is understood in meaning of the hadith of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. That's from one aspect. Another aspect is that hadith, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ, water is pure, nothing makes it impure, is more authentic than the hadith إِذَا كَانَ الْمَاء كُلَّتَيْن لَمْ يَحْمِلِ الْخَبْثِ. ولذلك, we already mentioned, the strong opinion, Wallahu a'lam, is that if a small amount of water becomes impure and none of its characteristics has changed, the color, taste, and smell has not changed, it still is considered pure. That's the strong opinion, Wallahu a'lam. And we have mentioned this before last week. If a small amount of water is contaminated by an impurity that does not alter its characteristics, it remains pure. If impurity falls into it, it does not change its color, taste, or smell, it remains pure. Because the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam said, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ. Water is pure. وَالْمَاءَ طُهُورٌ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ. Water is pure, and nothing makes it impure. And this is unrestricted, yani it includes both water that is small or large in its quantity. Like in that which is excluded from this by ijma', by yani unanimously agreed upon by the scholars, is if that water becomes impure, يعني if the color, taste, or smell has altered by that impurity. Now, then the author, he says, the third situation he mentions, that which is considered ma'un najis, he says, وَإِنْفَصَلَ عَنْ مَحَلِّ نَجَاسَةٍ قَبْلَ زَوَالِهَا. And this is the madhab, where they say that which is separated from the stained area before impurity was removed, like washing a dirty thobe. The first wash and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, the water that drops back in the bucket with water as a small amount, before the thobe becomes fully clean, makes that water najis. We've already spoken about this as well previously, this matter. مثلا, if you were to wash a impure thobe 3 times, and the impurity is still there. For example, if we wash an impurity the first time and then we squeeze the foam, and then we wash it a second time and we squeeze the foam, and then the third time and we squeeze the foam, that water that drips back into the bucket is considered impure. And this is considered impure, this is considered impure in its reality, haqiqatan, because the impurity has not truly been removed. Because the madhab, they say, it has to be, the najasa has to be washed 7 times, based on the hadith, أمرنا أن نغسل الأنجاس 7 كما قال, hadith of Ibn Umar, which is weak, where he said that we are commanded to wash impurity 7 times. For this example I gave, it is impure in its reality, haqiqatan, because the impurity is not truly removed, and also it is impure hukman in its ruling, because its legal state is not removed until after the 7th washing, according to the madhab. So if what separates after that 3rd washing, the impurity has been removed, what is it considered? It's considered impure in its ruling, hukman, wala haqiqatan. So the madhab, they say, is impure in its ruling. Why? Because there has to be 7 washes. Even though the impurity has gone, they say it is still considered impure. Laysa haqiqatan, lakin hukman in its ruling. And let's say, after the 10th wash, the impurity still remains. The madhab, they say it is still considered impure, haqiqat, in its reality, because the impurity is still there. And we mentioned the strong opinion, wallahu a'lam, is that the water is pure unless its characteristics has changed, its color, taste, or smell has changed. And that's the opinion of majority. And we spoke about this all last lesson or the lesson before in its detail. And as I mentioned, this all in reality is repetition of what the author mentioned already, where he spoke about the mas'ala إذا بلغ كلتين وهو الكثير إلى آخر قوله. And as I mentioned, إخوة, من مآخذ الكتاب is the organization of the book. So it would have been appropriate if the author mentioned this mas'ala with the mentioning of ma'un najis, because it's connected to it, if najis enters water. نعم تفضل أخي.
أحسن الله إليكم. قال المؤلف رحمه الله: فإن أضيف إلى الماء النجس طهور كثير غير تراب ونحوه، أو زال تغير النجس الكثير بنفسه، أو نزه منه فبقي بعده كثير غير متغير طهر.
نعم. Now the author, he speaks about the ways we can purify the water if something impure is mixed in the water. That's what that which the brother read, that is what the author is speaking about. The ways that we can purify the water if something impure is mixed in the water. For the first thing he mentions, he says, فَإِنْ أُضِيفَ إِلَى مَاءٍ نَجِسٍ طَهُورٌ كَثِيرٌ غَيْرُ تُرَابٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. He says, adding a lot of water that is tahur. For if the change of the water from impurity is removed by someone adding tahur water that is tahur to this water, then this change is removed, this impurity is removed. And if you pay attention, he says tahurun kathir, adding tahur, tahur, water that is tahur. Why? To distinguish it from the case where if the water is tahir, added to it. Because according to the Hanabila and majority of the scholars, which we spoke about last lesson, water that is tahir and not tahur, if it is added to the water that has become impure and changed, and if someone brings water that is tahir, for example, water which color taste has changed due to soap, mathalan, they say that water now becomes tahir, according to the method. Does that make sense? And that's why the author, he says after that, غَيْرُ تُرَابٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. وَنَحْوِهِ is like soap and the likes. وَغَيْرُ تُرَابٍ as well, because turab doesn't clean impurity. Na'am, we do tayammum with dust, but that's not something hissi, it's ma'nawi. It doesn't actually clean your body. Na'am, it's a ibadah. But turab, putting it in the water, it can't clean itself, so how can it clean the water? Na'am. For the author, he says here, فَإِنْ أُضِيفَ إِلَى الْمَاءِ نَجِسِ طَهُورٌ كَثِيرٌ. The reason it says طَهُورٌ كَثِيرٌ, to differentiate between if it is tahir. If you add a lot of soap with the water into this water that has been affected by the impurity, the madhab, they say that it changes the water from being najis to tahir. It's not considered tahur still, because it's been changed by soap and water. Lakin, according to the strong opinion, Allahu a'lam, as we mentioned last lesson, tahur and tahir is the same category, it's considered tahur. Tahir water is considered, and water is mixed with salt is considered water that is tahur, so long that that name is still there, that is still considered water. Now, and also he said tahurun kathir, this word kathir, because the madhab they stipulate here that the water that is tahur must be a large quantity. What is a large quantity of water? يعني كلتين and more, كلتين and more, as we've already spoken about. Why do they stipulate that the water that is tahur must be a large quantity, يعني كلتين or more? Because they say if it is a small amount of water that is tahur added, then the tahur water becomes impure upon the contact with the impurity. So the water becomes impure. So someone may ask, what if the impurity has disappeared? How can it be impure? Remember, ya ikhwata, according to them, a small amount of water becomes impure if it comes in contact with an impurity, even if it does not change. As they say, for example, if you have a small container that you use for ablution and it becomes impure, changing one of its characteristics, its color, taste, or smell, then you add another container of pure water to it, water that is tahur, and the impurity disappears. They say this water becomes impure, not pure. It's still considered najis. Why? Because it is a small amount of water that contacted the impurity that was in the container. So it becomes impure, even if none of its characteristics have changed. And as we mentioned, the stronger opinion, Wallahu A'lam, is if pure water is added to impure water and the change has disappeared, the impurity has removed, its color, taste, smell has been removed, then the water becomes pure. Whether he added water, whether the added water is a small or a large amount, because the ruling is based upon its reason, both in its presence and its absence. Al-hukm da'irun wa illatihi. So if the najasa is present, the ruling is present. If the najasa is absent, the ruling is absent. The water is impure if it changes, and if the change disappears, the impurity disappears. فحكم الحكم دائر مع علته. نعم. But that's the first way we change, or the method they say that we can remove the impurity if that impurity enters the water. The second is where he says after that, أو زال تغير النجس الكثير بنفسه. If the impurity goes by itself due to long duration. For water that is tahur, whether in small or large quantity, into which impurity falls and changes one of its characteristics, such that we've seen the color has changed, like it's become yellow, for example, from the impurity, or its taste has changed, for example, it's become bitter, or its smell has changed because smell has a foul odor, due to the impurity, becomes najis. If this change vanishes after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, or even after a month, by itself, then it's considered pure. And when we say by itself, when it says binafsihi, what does this mean? It means without any human intervention, for simply staying in its place over time. And this change disappears and the water returns to its original clarity, such that the smell, the altered taste, or the altered color has gone. But it returns to being ma'a tuhur. Why? The reasoning is al-hukmu yaduru ma'illatihi wujudun wa adama. The ruling goes around its reasonings, illa. It exists when it exists and is absent when it is absent. Now, then he says after that, the third thing, the third way or third thing that removes the impurity and it makes the water tahur after najis has entered it. He says, أو نزح منه فبقي بعده كثير غير متغير طهر. He says, if the impure substance was physically removed, which as a result means that the majority, kullatain of the water remains unchanged. If the impure substance, the impurity, was physically removed, and as a result, there is still this kullatain of water that remains unchanged. But this means the water has not become a small amount. Because if water has become a small amount, it becomes impure even if the water has not changed according to the method. However, if the remaining water, after removing its impurity physically, is kullatain above, then it is considered pure. The water is still considered tahur. So in summary of what we just mentioned, the methodologies or the methods of purification of water where impurity enters it, or purifying the water where impurity has entered it. The first, they said, a small amount of impure water becomes pure through one means. okay, which is idafa, adding more water, on the condition that any change, its color, taste, or smell, disappears if it existed. And the second category is if the water is a large amount. If a water is a large amount, uh, or a large amount of impure water is purified, by one of three things. So the first category I mentioned is a small amount of impure water. It becomes pure by one means. What is that one means? إضافة الماء. That you have to add more water. يعني water that is kullatain. On the condition that any change, color, or taste or smell disappears if it existed. Now, the second category is if a large amount of impure water is purified, or a large amount of impure water is purified by one of three things. The first is adding the whole water. The second is the impurity goes by itself due to long duration. And the third is if the impure substance was physically removed, which as a result means majority kullatain of the water remains unchanged. And the strong opinion of Allah in regards to all of this, and we've already spoken about it before last lesson, when all of us spoke about this mas'ala already, that the determining factor is the change. And it's not about the smallness or the largeness and quantity of the water. And this is another narration of the madhab. So whenever the impurity disappears by whatever means, the water becomes pure. Now, and like I mentioned, this is another narration of the madhab. Now,
أحسن الله إليكم. قال المؤلف رحمه الله: وإن شك في نجاسة ماء أو غيره أو طهارته بنى على اليقين.
now, then the author, rahimahullah, he speaks about some masail pertaining to doubts. So he says here, وإن شك في نجاسة ماء أو غيره أو طهارته بنى على اليقين. If one doubts of the impurity of the water or other than it, if it's impure or pure, then he builds upon what he's certain about. So he says, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةِ الْمَاءِ. وَإِن شَكَّ, the doubt means hesitation between two possibilities, neither of which has an advantage over the other. This is the basic definition of shak. For if one of the possibilities is distinguished from the other, the more likely is considered dhan. This is called dhan. This is where perception of something with the prospect of being more likely than the other thing, and that which he considers less likely is called wahm. Perception of something with the prospect of being less likely than the other possibility. That's called wahm. But this is the definition of shak according to the scholars of usuliyun. That's how the usuliyun define a shak. Okay, is where he has hesitation between two possibilities, neither of which has advantage over the other. So if one has advantage and he thinks this is more likely, this is called dhan. The one that he thinks is less likely is called wahm. This is what is defined in the usuliyin. As for the fuqaha, ya ikhwata, when you look at the books of fiqh, like in front of us, and the word shak is mentioned, when the word shak is mentioned, it's not the same definition as the usuliyun. The word shak, it means the opposite of certainty. So in this case, a dhan falls under shak. Even if you think this is more likely, this is considered shak, in the category of shak. Does that make sense, ya ikhwata? For example, if someone has water and doubts whether it is impure or pure, but he has preponderant thoughts that it is pure, that is considered doubt, shak, according to the fuqaha. So one must be certain. Like according to the usuliyun, that is considered dhan. They differentiate, the usuliyun, they differentiate between shak, dhan, wa wahm. So if one is hesitant, he doesn't have any preponderant thought of what is more likely, for this is considered shak, according to the fuqaha. If someone asked about Zayd's arrival tomorrow, مثلا, when is Zayd coming tomorrow? And he says, I don't know. Perhaps he will come, perhaps he won't. This is called doubt. This is called shak, and the fuqaha. If he says, I think he will come tomorrow at 5 o'clock, I think, but I'm not sure. This is not considered doubt, according to the usuliyin. This will be dhan. Like according to fuqaha, this is also considered doubt. It's important, ya ikhwata, to understand this distinction in regards to the terminology between usuliyin and the terminology of the fuqaha regarding the word shak. For when the author he says here, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةِ الْمَاءِ, when shakka refers to hesitation between two things without being certain of the either, even if he may have a stronger inclination towards one of the possibilities. For when he says shak here, there's two possibilities. There's two meanings here. Okay. The first is it is possible that he's doubtful and has a stronger inclination towards one of the two possibilities. He has preponderant thinking. This falls under when the author says in shak, and also what falls under this is if he has no inclination to two possibilities, and both possibilities are equal in his view. For both of these are intended in his context. When the author says here, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةِ الْمَاءِ. وَإِن شَكَّ, a shak, the one who's doubtful, refers to the ones who are a normal type of doubt. As for those that have been afflicted with obsessive wiswas, his doubt is disregarded. Okay? ولذلك there's a قاعدة that the fuqaha mention is that أن الشاك يبني على اليقين أما الموسوس فإنه على الأكمل. The one who doubts, he should act upon certainty. As for the one who suffers from obsessive wiswas, whose condition is dominated by this wiswas, then he does not give attention to the doubts. Okay? He does not give attention, he does not turn to the doubts. So if he has doubt, for example, the person who has obsessive wiswas, he has doubt of purity or impurity, he's uncertain. He acts upon that it is pure. He doesn't turn to the doubts. If he doubts the units of prayer in terms of the quantity of units, he acts upon what is the more units rather than the less, and so on. Because his doubt is disregarded. He doesn't turn to the doubt. But we do not say he should act upon certainty in this case. When the author is talking about when shakka fi najasil ma, he's talking about who? The one who has normal doubt, not the one that is afflicted by obsessive wiswas. No. But the author says, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةٍ مَا غَيْرِهِ أَوْ طَهَارَتِهِ بَنَى عَلَى الْيَقِينِ. فَيَسَيْ فِي نَجَاسَةٍ مَا, if you have doubt in the impurity of the water, or غَيْرِهِ, or first of all, فِي نَجَاسَةٍ مَا, a person has doubt about the impurity or purity of water. This has three situations. The first situation is he doubts whether impurity has come into contact with the water. He doubts whether impurity has come into contact with the water. The second situation is he knows that impurity has come into contact with the water, but he does not know whether the water has changed due to this impurity. And the third is he knows, he's certain and convinced that the water is impure, but he then doubts whether the additional water added to it has purified it or not. So the first and the second cases, one is uncertain about the impurity. In the third case, one is uncertain about the purity. Now, but that's the meaning when he says, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةٍ الْمَاءِ, these three situations. If one is uncertain about the impurity or purity of water or anything else, the uncertainty is about impurity that has the two forms I mentioned. And uncertainty about the purity means uncertainty about the purified water added onto the water after being certain of its impurity, the third situation that we mentioned. Now, so he says, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةٍ مَاءٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ, or other than that, regarding liquids other than water, such as oil, or anything that is drunk, anything that someone drinks. For the fuqaha, they call anything that is drunk other than water is a liquid. Okay, like juice or tea, ila akhirih. For if one is uncertain about its impurity, not for the purpose of purification, but for the purpose of drinking, then one should act upon certainty. And likewise, when the author says al-ghayrihi, also includes solids, such as clothing. If one is uncertain whether impurity has come into contact with his garments, or if he sees his carpet, one prays and someone says to him that my children walk on this carpet, perhaps impurity has come into contact with it because he urinates, he's still in his nappy and he urinates. For but it's not there's no certainty. One is uncertain about its impurity. They act upon what is certain. طيب بنى على اليقين أو غيره أو طهارته, which we just spoke about. Then he says بنى على اليقين. He builds upon al-yaqeen. He acts upon certainty. What does certainty mean? What does yaqeen mean? هو البقاء على المعلوم قبل الشك. It is the it's the continuity of the known state before the doubt. والبقاء على المعلوم قبل الشك. For it means what he is certain of. What he was certain of first, يعني, of the two possibilities. The one that he knew. That it is pure if he doubts impurity, and that it is impure if he doubts purity. If a man sees water and he does not know if impurity has entered it, or he knows that impurity has entered it, but does not know if it has become impure, we say to him that the water is pure because certainty for you is purity, and that is the asl, that is the default. And this is a dalil min al-adillah that the Hanabila, they rely upon. It's called istishab. Istishab. It's a principle in usul al-fiqh, and it's a type of dalil that the Hanabila, they mention. Al-istishab is basically the legal presumption that a state of affairs known to have existed in the past continues to exist in the present and future until there is a clear evidence it has changed. So essentially, it functions as a way to maintain the original state when uncertainty or doubt arises. So it is considered the apparent ruling, meaning it is used by fuqaha when there is a lack of specific evidence to prove a change. So if you're a doubt about whether a situation has changed, you fall back on what the original state was. And many qawaid principles and Islamic legal maxims are derived from this dalil al-istishab. Like, for example, al-yaqeen la yazilu bishak. That certainty is not overruled by doubts. If you're certain about something in the past, a mere doubt about its current state cannot cancel that certainty. Also from those qawaid is al-asl fil ashya' al-ibaha. The fundamental state of things is permissibility. Unless there is a specific prohibition in religious text, things are assumed to be permissible. When it comes to worldly matters, the asl is everything is permissible. When it comes to umur of ibadah and worship and legislation, then the asl is haram. Like when it comes to worldly matters, the asl is permissible. Another principle that comes from this dalil istishab is al-bara' al-asliya, that the fundamental state is the absence of liability. A person is presumed innocent or free from debt until proven otherwise. For the default, certainty that is pure, if the default is, if someone has certainty that thing is pure, that certainty is not removed by doubt. And this is min qawaid al-kubra, the 5 great maxims. From them is al-yaqeen la yazulu bishak. And the asl of this principle is the hadith in Sahihain. Hadith in Sahihain, where a man who felt something during the prayer, he complained to the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, and the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said to him, لا ينصرف حتى يسمع صوتا أو يجد ريحا. He said, do not stop praying until you notice a smell or you hear a sound. A man, he felt something, he felt he lost his ablution in his prayer. But he complained to the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. The Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he replied, he said, to not leave the prayer unless you notice a smell or hear a sound, until there's certainty. Also the hadith of, or narrated by Abi Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, where the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إن شك أحدكم في صلاته فلم يدري كم صلى 3 أو 4 فليطرح الشك وليبني على ما استيقن. Where the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam says, when any one of you is in doubts about his prayer and he does not know how many he has prayed, 3 or 4 units, then he should cast aside his doubt and base his prayer on what he is certain of. And this indicates that it is a general principle. Also, that which is narrated in Al-Muwatta, Imam Malik rahimahullah, classified authentic by Imam Al-Albani rahimahullah, that Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, when he was with Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu, they passed by a water basin. For Amr ibn As radiyallahu anhu, he doubted its purity. And he said, Ya sahib al-ma, O owner of the water, tell us about this water. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, لا تخبرنا, do not tell us. Why? Because of the principle to act upon certainty. So this is a noble legal principle, ikhwata. Certainty is not overturned by doubts. Any established certainty cannot be overturned by doubts. And the greater the matter is, the greater the prohibition against overturning it by doubts. So it becomes forbidden to overturn it by doubts. For مثلا, whoever's Islam is established with certainty, it cannot have the Islam overturned by doubts. Whoever we know to be Muslim, whose Islam is established with certainty, cannot have the Islam overturned by doubt. And some brothers, they say, my grandma or my grandfather passed away 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. She was a Muslim, but I doubt whether she prayed or he prayed or not, because they lived in the West or a place of ignorance. Well, how do we reply to this? We say that certainty is that they were Muslim, and Islam is not overturned by doubt. If you hear that a Muslim is accused of disbelief regarding an act that constitutes disbelief, one must ascertain its truth. So there's three situations that could come under that. Either you know that he did or said what he is accused of. In this case, what he said or did is established by judging him as a disbeliever with his conditions and his ضوابط إلى آخره وانتفاء الموانع. And the second situation, you're certain that he neither said this nor did he act upon this. In this case, your duty is what? To deny this accusation and affirm his Islam, even if you dislike him. And the third situation is you're uncertain about what has been denied and what has been affirmed, and the matter is ambiguous. Here you revert to this fundamental principle, al-yaqin la yazil bi-shak, which is certainty he is a Muslim, and Islam cannot be nullified by doubt. And those who become extreme, engaging in takfir and transgressing in takfir, the reason they transgress in this because they're ignorant of this noble principle. Because they're ignorant of this noble principle. Third, they declare who they wish to be disbelievers merely based on doubts and possibilities. حتى it could be even lies. وأهل السنة والجماعة يا إخوة, we say that whoever's Islam is established with certainty, his Islam remains established and cannot be nullified by doubts. If his disbelief is established with certainty and the scholars have ruled him as a disbeliever, then the ruling applies to him under the ضوابط القواعد انتفاء الموانع إلى آخره, which is spoken about in مسألة التكفير والتبديع. But this is very important, يا إخوة. Whoever is proven to be upright, adheres to the Sunnah upon the manhaj of the Salaf with certainty, whoever is proven to be from Ahl Sunnah upon the correct aqidah wal manhaj, that cannot be removed from him based on doubts until certainty is reached. And part of this certainty is knowing that he has mathalan abandoned a asl from usul Ahl Sunnah, or even receiving a khabar, a report from a trustworthy and reliable source, and that report of a trustworthy and reliable person is acceptable. However, who is considered trustworthy, who is considered reliable, this is something that has to be investigated and understood. Does that make sense, ikhwata? Anything proven with certainty cannot be removed by doubt. It remains based on certainty. This is the fundamental principle here. It's part of the ease of the Sharia. And reminds me of a story that happened with me. Just thinking about this, because I just mentioned it, ikhwata, Ahlul Sunnah, we believe what? If a reliable source, or if a reliable source comes to us, where we find that this person has fell into something that takes him away from the Sunnah, it's accepted. Like in what is considered reliable and what is not reliable, this is something that has to be understood and investigated. And I mentioned a story here that occurred with me, I think around last year or year before, taqriban. His sister emailed us that on a group chat, someone must have posted something from our Telegram channel, Tasheel-Al-Ilm. For one of these sisters, wafaqaha Allah, asked her teachers about Abu Anas. Okay, one of her teachers in UK about Abu Anas. I don't know who the teacher was. They were asked, but they didn't reply. They didn't want to answer that. She didn't want to disclose the teacher's name. Lakin she asked about who's Abu Anas. And these brothers, or this brother, Wallahu a'lam who he was, hastily said to her, Abu Anas is part of an organization in UK who are known for ghulu. And this was a lie against me and a slander. Wallahi, min fadlillah azza wa jal alayh, I have not been in the West for over 10, 12 years. I probably came back to UK 3 times. And I've only come back for a very short time for family reasons. I haven't been involved with any institute, wala any masjid. The most I've done is probably given a khutbah in a local masjid. Well, in my life, I've never mixed with Western students. Western students, they do not know me, and likewise, I do not know them. For when it was said to them that this is a lie, they replied and they said, sorry, we were mistaken. To the sister, they said, we were mistaken. However, this brother, he's an imam of a masjid that mixes with Ahl Bid'ah, and he's from them. That's another slander and a lie. As I mentioned, having been in UK for over 10, 12, 13 years, perhaps came back to UK 3 times within those 10, 12 years. For when it was said to them that this was a lie, and the sister said it to them or replied to them, they stopped replying. For Allah, ya ikhwata, some brothers, ma yastahi, ma yattaqillah, do not fear Allah Azza wa Jalla and the danger of what they're saying, causing doubts to the shabab. And this is a type of dhulm. And I leave this in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And my advice, ya ikhwata, when people tell you, don't listen to this person, don't listen to this person, bila dalil, wala hujja, wala shay, those who are in the West, ya ikhwata, who you may be taking ilm from the students of knowledge, could be benefiting from, know where they studied, ikhwata. Know who are their mashayikh. Are they on the same path as them? Do not look at numbers and shuhra, for that is not a dalil. He is someone to be trusted. هذا ليس منهج أهل السنة. That's the منهج إخوان المسلمين. They care about the numbers and the جماعة الآخرين. اجتماع الناس. And be aware, يا إخوة, of being too attached to teachers, or students of knowledge, and even mashayikh, to the point that it reaches ghulu. I've seen this in the West. Everything that your teacher says is as if it's wahi for you. And some of these brothers, hadahumullah, they exploit their students. It's as if they're calling the students to him rather than to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فأسأل الله عز وجل السلام والعافية. الشاهد why was I speaking about this مسألة? Muhammad? What was I speaking about?
أحسن الله عليكم. You mentioned that if a reliable source comes to a person, that if they fill out the sunnah, you accept it, but they have to be investigated.
نعم. I was talking about the principle اليقين لا يزول بالشك. نعم اليقين لا يزول بالشك. For regarding this issue, if someone doubts the impurity of something, they should act upon certainty, which is its purity, even if they see it has changed. And the fuqaha, they say, even if they see if they see it has changed, we rule it to be pure because they do not know of any impurity in it. Because the change could be due to a prolonged stagnation method. Does that make sense, ikhwata? If someone doubts the impurity of something, they should act upon certainty, which is its purity, even if they see it has changed. And because it could change due to prolonged stagnation. نعم تفضل أخي.
أحسن الله إليكم. وإن اشتبه طهور بنجس حرم استعماله مالهما ولم يتحر، ولا يشترط للتيمم إراقتهما ولا خلطهما.
Now, then the author, he says here, if someone has a doubt between a water being tahur or najis, okay? So if someone has 2 containers, one containing pure water that is tahur, and the other is water that is najis, impure water, and they are identical in shape, color, and size, the madhab, they say it is not permissible for him to use them due to this confusion. This is because he is certain that one of them is impure, and he cannot distinguish which one is pure and which one is impure, which one to use for purification. But according to the madhab, it is not permissible for the limbs to come into direct contact with impure water except out of necessity. But it is not permissible to use impure water neither for removing al-khabath or for lifting off al-hadith, as this would be as if you are using impure water. For they believe that using impure water is absolutely haram. For the reason preventing him from using either of these two waters. For one in front of me is water that is tuhur, another bottle of water in front of me is water in najis. But he cannot distinguish between them. Which one is tuhur, which one is najis? The madhab they say here, it is haram for him, حرم استعمالهما. In the matan, it's haram for him to use both of them. The reason preventing him from using either of them for purification is that avoiding impure and forbidden substances is obligatory. And this obligation cannot be fulfilled except by avoiding both. And this is a principle in usul al-fiqh, ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. That without which an obligation cannot be fulfilled itself is obligatory. Therefore, the obligation of avoiding the haram cannot be fulfilled except by avoiding both of the containers. So it becomes obligatory upon him to avoid even that water that is طهور. فقال الشيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله, he said إذا اشتبه الطاهر بالنجس فاجتنابهما جميعا واجب لأنه يتضمن لفعل محرم وهو تودأ بنجس وتحليل أحدهما تحكم من عند نفسي بلا برهان وتحكم من عند نفس بلا برهان وقال لا أعلم أحدا جوزه. He says rahimahullah, if in doubt in distinguishing between a water that is pure and impure, he said then avoiding both is obligatory because it involves performing a forbidden act, which is performing wudu with impure water. And he said making one of them permissible is a judgment that you're making without proof. And then he said لا أعلم أحدا جوزه, and I do not know of anyone who has permitted it. And this could be the evidence for this could be the hadith which is in Sahihain that some Ahlul Ilm they mention, where the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said وَإِن وَجَدْتَ مَعَ كَلْبِكَ كَلْبًا غَيْرَهُ وَقَدْ قُتِلَ فَلَا تَأْكُلْ فَإِنَّكَ لَا تَدْرِي أَيُّهُمَا قَتَلَهُ. Where the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said if you find another dog with yours and the game has been killed, do not eat, for you do not know which of them killed the animal. The hadith is about a companion who asked the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام about hunting with his trained dogs, and the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام told him to eat whatever the dogs catch as long as he mentions Allah's name on letting them loose after the game, and as long as no other dog hunts with them. If he finds another dog, then he should not eat from it because he only mentioned the name of Allah on the dog that he sent, not someone else's dog. And also the hadith in Muslim where the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام said إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينه مشتبهات لا يعلمه الكثير من الناس فمن اتقى شبهات استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع الشبهات وقع في الحرام. Where the Messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام said indeed the halal is clear and the haram is clear, and between them are doubtful matters that many people do not know. And whoever avoids the doubtful matters clears his liability regarding his religion and his honor, and whoever falls into doubtful matters falls into that which is haram. For the author says حرم استعمالهما ولم يتحرر, and he does not investigate ولا يشترط لتيمم إراقتهما ولا خلطهما, and it's not conditioned for him to do for him to pour this water out or to mix the water together, the water that is najis and tuhur. For he says ولم يتحرر, he does not investigate, nor does he pour away the water or mix it. This statement, he does not investigate, meaning he does not take in consideration, or he does not act upon preponderance or probability which one is pure and which one is impure. Rather he avoids both, even if he has qara'in. If he has qara'in is like if he has something that he can build upon. Even if he has something he can build upon, the madhab they say that he leaves off both water. Does not even investigate or act upon preponderance, fault or probability. And this in reality, this statement of him saying وَلَمْ يَتَحَرَّ, that he does not investigate, is an added phrase which is unnecessary, right? Because before that he says حَرُمَ إِسْتِعْمَالُهُمَا, that it is forbidden to use them. But that suffices. After you know it's haram, there's no need for him to say وَلَمْ يَتَحَرَّ, that he should not investigate. Lakin, why did he say it? There's a benefit. Why did he say walam yatahar? He mentioned this after saying it is haram, even though that meaning's already in it when he says haram isti'malhum. Like he adds this wording, walam yatahar, he does not investigate, to clarify that there's a strong difference of opinion within the school of Imam Ahmad, within the madhab of Imam Ahmad. Because there's another opinion within the madhab that one should investigate between the two waters. That indicates a difference of opinion. هذا من اللطائف يا إخوة. Sometimes adding a phrase, when the author adds a phrase or adds on something that you would think and apparently is not needed, it is done to highlight books of fiqh, the strong difference of opinion. But another opinion, which is the opinion that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah chose, another opinion within the madhab, is that if he has doubt between two waters, one is pure and one is najis, that he should investigate. He should build upon what is more preponderant, what is the greater possibility. If he investigates, he finds evidence, and his preponderance of probability leads him to believe which one is pure, and he acts accordingly to that. And this is the stronger opinion, wallahu a'lam, that he investigates and builds upon what he thinks is more likely that is pure. Because the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, as in the narrated Sahihain, وَإِذَا شَكَّ أَحَدَكُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِ فَلْيَتَحَرَّ صَوَابٍ. When one of you is in doubt about his prayer, فَلْيَتَحَرَّ صَوَابٍ. Let him investigate or aim to do what is correct. وَمِنَ الْقَوَائِدِ الْأُصُولِيَّةِ. From the fundamental principles is إِذَا تَعَذَّرَ الْيَقِينَ رَجَعَ إِلَى غَلَبَةِ الظَّنِّ. If certainty is impossible, then he resorts to preponderance of probability. The preponderance of probability and a preponderant thinking. And preponderance of probability or preponderant thinking is like seeing some signs of impurity, such as color or traces of the dog's saliva, even if they are few and not apparent. Or, for example, one of the bottles was on the bed and one is on the floor, and he remembers that the pure one was on the bed. So he has some kind of evidence or signs that he can take or that he can extract to indicate to him what is more probable of which water is pure and which one is najis. And that's the madhab of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. And like I said, it's also another opinion within the madhab. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, or Shaykh Salih al-Uthaymeen, and also have chosen this opinion, and also the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, where they say that he investigates which one is considered more pure. If he's got nothing to investigate, he's got no qara'in, he's got nothing he can build upon from signs and evidences, then khalas, he's considered doubtful. If he's considered doubtful, he leaves off both water and he does tayammum, as the author mentions. And then the author says, وَلَا يُشْتَرَطُ لِتَيَمُّمْ إِرَاقَتُهُمَا وَلَا خَلْطُهُمَا. He does tayammum, but it doesn't have to be a condition for him to do tayammum that he has to pour the water out or to mix the water together. What does this mean? For example, if there are two vessels or containers of water, one impurity entered like urine, مثلا, but he does not know which one it entered into. He cannot distinguish which one out of the two. The madhab, they say he leaves off both and he does tayammum. Of course, if he does not find any other water. Because they say that it takes the ruling of not having water. It's as if he does not have water. Even though water is present in front of him, it's as if he cannot attain the water. It falls under the ayah فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. And we'll take this in Bab al-Tayammum, inshallah ta'ala. When is Tayammum legislated, the three situations, we'll mention it when it comes, inshallah ta'ala. Lakin, from that is, even if water is present, but you cannot attain the water, and it's as if the water is absent. It takes the ruling of the water actually being absent, as if it is absent. So it's legislated for you to do Tayammum. طيب. And then he says, لا يشترط لتيمم إراقتهما ولا خلطهما. It's not a condition for him to pour out the water to mix them. Why? Because they say it will be a waste and a loss of property to pour out the water, or even mix the water, because someone may come a day after, a few hours later, and may tell him which one is pure and which one is impure. Someone may know which one is pure, which one is impure. For example, someone who saw the impurity that fell into one of the two vessels might tell him after, when he sees him, that the urine fell into this vessel and not the other, so that there will be no loss. طيب. نعم، تفضل.
أحسن الله إليكم. وإن اشتبه بطاهر توضأ منهما وضوءا واحدا، من هذا غرفة ومن هذا غرفة، وصلى صلاة واحدة.
نعم. طيب. Before we speak about this مسألة, uh, why does the madhab يا إخوة not tell him to pray twice? يعني if he has water that is tahur, water that is najis, two bottles, one is tahur, one is najis, he can't distinguish between them both. Why did the madhab not say for him to use both waters, do wudu with the first bottle and then wudu again with the second bottle? Nah. Because if he done wudu with one of the bottles, then he's certain at least, and then he prays, he's certain he prayed with wudu, with water that is tahur. Yani why did the madhab not say that he does wudu with one of the container or one of the bottles and then prays, and he does wudu with the other bottle and then prays again? Huh? Because the madhab, they say, as we mentioned, that this is intentionally praying, is as if he's intentionally praying without wudu. Because once he has used water that is najis, and praying without wudu is considered min al-kaba'ir, from the major sins. Some al-ilm, they say the one who prays without wudu knowingly is kufr, because he's playing with the deen. But this is why they say for him to do tayammum. This is why they say for him to do tayammum. Does that make sense here? Because if you use one of the water, then he has definitely used water that is najis, and if he prayed in that, it's as if he's praying without water, water that is pure, which is considered from the major sins. And according to this as well, what falls under this as well is if someone has stolen water and permissible water, it takes the same ruling. Like the ruling of if there's a bottle of water that is tahur and then there's a bottle of water that is najis, and you can't distinguish between both, that which also falls under this, the same ruling, is if someone has water that is haram and water that is permissible. For example, water that is stolen and water that is permissible and pure. But the madhab, they say the ruling is the same, and it's forbidden, it's haram for him to use both. And it's not valid, and he should not investigate further which one could be permissible or halal and which one could be stolen and haram. And that's based on the principle that ablution with stolen water and prayer on stolen land is invalid, which is the madhab of Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. Whereas the majority, they say if someone prays in a stolen land or with stolen water, the water is valid and the prayer is valid, but they are a sinner. Now, then the brother, he read this is the second last mas'ala, where this scenario now is same as what we just mentioned, but now he's confused between water that is tahur wa tahir. So he has two small amounts of water. One is tahur. He has a fresh bottle of water he just bought, which is tahur. And he has another bottle of water, which is tahir. For example, someone done his obligatory wudu, and that water that dripped from his body fell into this bucket or this bottle. Okay, so it's considered tahir according to the madhab. For the author, he says here, if one cannot differentiate between the two water, one is tahur and one is tahir, he should do wudu by taking one alternate handful from each container. توضأ منهما وضوءا واحدا من هذا غرفة ومن هذا غرفة. He should do wudu by taking one alternate handful from each container. So when you want to rinse your mouth, you rinse twice. When you want to istinthar, to sniff the water out, you do it twice. And the reason is that one of the two actions will undoubtedly he would have performed with water that is pure, and that is tahur, which removes or lifts off the ritual impurity. نعم.
أحسن الله إليكم. وإن اشتبهت ثياب طاهرة بنجسة، صلى في كل ثوب صلاة بعدد النجس وزاد صلاة.
نعم. يعني in the مسألة before that, when water is طهور ونجس, and you cannot distinguish between both. The madhab, they say, is haram for him to use both, يعني to leave off both. Like in here, when he's doubtful if the water is طهور or طاهر, the madhab, they say, he uses both. When he does wudu, he puts his hand in the water that is طهور, washes his, يعني himself with all of the limbs. يعني for example, he rinses his mouth after he puts his hand in the water is طهور, and also he puts his hand in the water طاهر and rinses his mouth. Okay. The reason why here he is allowed to use the water is because, as we mentioned, water that is impure is haram for it to touch the body. So it's not allowed to be used in any case. Whereas in this case, he's using something that is pure. And by using both, he's certain that he has used some water that is tahur. Does that make sense? He does not perform ablution with one water and then pray, and then perform ablution with the second water and pray again. He uses both waters. For when he's rinsing his mouth, مثلا, he puts his hand in one of the vessels, rinses his mouth. Then he puts his hand again in another vessel and rinses his mouth. He does that with every limb of that which is washed in الوضوء. طيب قد يسأل السائل, why is it not the case that he performs wudu and then prays, and then performs wudu with the other one and then prays? If he uses one of the water, does wudu with that, prays, or sorry, he doesn't have to pray. If he uses one of the bottles, and does wudu with it, and then after he finishes, he uses the other bottle to do wudu with it, because then he's definitely done wudu with ma'at tahur. Why is it he doesn't do this? Why is it that the madhab, they say he does wudu by using both at the same time, in one wudu? Does that make sense? The question makes sense, Muhammad?
أحسن الله إليكم. نعم.
Now forget about the salah, ya ikhwata. He hasn't prayed. Okay, Muhammad, explain to me the mas'ala, what I just mentioned. What's the question I just mentioned? حتى فهم الناس.
So we have two waters. We have one that is tahir and one that is tahur. You mentioned if someone asks, why doesn't one just use one of them and pray and then use the other one and pray?
No, forget about praying. Why didn't he just use one of them to do wudu with, and then after he finishes with one of the bottles, then he does wudu with the other bottle and does wudu with it? Now, so why does he not do that rather than the madhab saying that he uses both of them at the same time? Because the madhab, they say, when he says here in the matan, min hadha gharfatan wa min hadha gharfatan. Whilst he's doing wudu, each limb that he washes. For example, when you wash your arms, for example, when you're doing wudu, when washing the arms, you put your hands in one of the bottles of water and you wash your arm. And then after that, you put your hands in the other bottle of water and you wash your arm. So it's one wudu, You're using both waters in one wudu. Why is it the madhab, they say he has to do this rather than saying that let him just do wudu completely with one water, and then after he finishes, do wudu completely with the other water? The reason is, ikhwata, because if he was to do wudu completely with each water, he will be doubtful both times. I think someone mentioned that on the chat. He will be doubtful both times in his wudu. But his wudu will not be valid. His wudu will not be valid. His wudu would not be valid for the one in doubt about his intention. So he has to have a firm intention, which will take in bab al-wudu. He has to have a firm intention. Now, as we mentioned, the stronger opinion of Allah A'lam is that there's no category, ma' al-tahir. Water is two types, tahur wa najis. So if you're in this situation, you can mix the water and you can use both of the water. Inshallah ta'ala. Now, and then the brother, he read the last thing the author mentions, and we'll finish here inshallah ta'ala, where he says, وَإِنْ اشْتَبَهَتْ ثِيَابٌ طَاهِرَةٌ بِنَجَسٍ صَلَّ فِي كُلِّ ثَوْبٍ صَلَاةٍ بِعَدَدِ النَّجِسِ وَزَادَ الصَّلَاةِ. طيب. Then he mentioned if pure clothes become doubtful with impure, or clothes that are haram, forbidden, then what should he do? He should pray with the amount of clothes that are considered najis or haram and add one prayer to that. Someone may ask, this chapter or this heading is about water. Why is the author mentioning a masala about clothes here? Huh? Yani, what's the correlation here with water? They say, number one, because the discussion is about impurity, because he started talking about impurity, and he wanted to extend it from water to other things. Some they also say because ablution and lifting off ritual impurity al-hadith is one of the conditions of prayer. And likewise, covering the awrah is a condition of the prayer. So they say there's a connection. But that's why he mentioned this at the end. But how can pure clothes become mixed with impure ones? A person, for example, has a garment which the color is not visible. Impurity falls on his garment. He has another garment of the same color, for example. He hangs both garments on a hanger. And when he wants to pray, he does not know which one of the two garments has been contaminated with urine or something similar of impurity. For in this case, he knows with certainty that one of the garments is pure and one of them is impure. But he's in doubt which one is pure and which one is impure. Or likewise forbidden. And in author he mentions I didn't mention it here. I think it's a Rod al-Murbi I'm thinking about, probably. Like in the madhab, they also say, also if he's in doubt if the clothes is muharram or halal. Muharram, for example, if it's for men, if it's made of harir, silk, and you cannot distinguish is it actual silk or the is it the actual silk or not, or if the clothes is stolen, for example, if someone takes a garment from another without their permission, like a young man who took a garment from his friend's room without permission, knowing that his friend or neighbor wouldn't allow him to wear it, and then he hangs it up, the garment he took without his permission is considered stolen. According to the madhab, prayer is not valid in clothes that are stolen or impure. Okay. Also that which is stolen, according to the madhab, prayer is not valid. For if one cannot distinguish between a clean and dirty thobe or garment or a permissible and haram thobe or garment, and he has no other thobe or unable to wash them, what shall he do? The madhab, they say there's two situations. The first situation, he knows the number of clothes that is impure or forbidden. Here the madhab, they say he prays in accordance to the number of the impure or haram clothes and adds a prayer. So for example, if he has 6 phobes, 3 of them are clean and 3 are not. He prays 4 times with different phobes so that he's certain that he has prayed one of the prayers with a phobe that is clean. The second situation is that he does not know the number of clothes that is impure or forbidden. For here the madhab, they say he prays in each form, he prays with each garment and phobe so that he has attained certainty. طيب, هنا سؤال يا إخوة. Previously we mentioned, or the author mentions, if in doubt between pure water and impure water, it is forbidden to use either, and one should not investigate. But here, if permissible clothing is mixed with forbidden clothing, or pure clothing with impure clothing, then one must use, or one may use it. One must use it. If one has 2 garments, one is pure and the other is impure, the one has to pray in both. Like in the case of the water, if it's haram or halal or impure or pure, and he's in doubt which one is impure or pure, he has to leave off both, right? Why did the author differentiate between both situations? Is the question understood or not? Hamdi, you understand the masala or not? Or shall I repeat it?
Assalamu alaikum. I think I understand it, but you could repeat it.
No. If you understand it, explain it, inshallah.
So we mentioned 2 situations of either praying in a stolen thobe or a thobe that is impure.
No.
I'm not sure if I'm
I'll
mentioning the thing that you mentioned.
I'll mention it again. We mentioned previously, the author he mentions, that water, if there's water that is tahur and water that is najis, in front of you there's 2 bottles, water that is tahur, water is najis. You know with certainty one of them is pure, one of them is impure, and you cannot differentiate between them both. You do not know which one is pure, which one is impure. The madhab, they said that you have to leave off both, right? You have to leave off both. Like in this mas'ala, about clothes, if one garment is pure, is pure and the other has impurity on it, the madhab don't say that you leave off both. They say here that you pray with the amount of thawbs that are najis, and you add on another prayer, meaning that you have prayed with a garment that is impure. But why is it that they differentiate between when there's impurity or purity and you doubt which one is pure, which one is impure, when it's a garment and when it is water? The reasoning is, ikhwata, there are differences between the two situations. The first difference is that the water has a substitute, which is tayammum. So one may perform tayammum. If water is mixed with impure water, it's not necessary to use it because water has a substitute. As for covering one's aura, it has no substitute. You have to cover your aura. And the second difference they mention is using impure water contaminates the entire body, unlike using impure clothing. And the third difference they mention is that if one finds no clothing or no other clothing, then he has to use impure clothes. He has to wear impure clothes to cover his private parts, unlike impure water. Now, like in the correct opinion, Allahu A'lam, is he investigates and he builds upon what he thinks is most likely that is pure, and he uses that. For the correct approach in all matters of doubts, whether in doubt being something pure, tuhur or tahir, or something tuhur or najis, or something prohibited, haram or permissible, or something impure and pure, is to investigate. He should look what he believes to be most likely pure or permissible and pray in it. And we mentioned the adillah for that. And it's sufficient for him to just pray once, instead of having for him to repeat every single prayer. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. وهذه الاستطاعة Allah says, fear Allah to the best of your ability. And ability is fulfilled when one strives to find a clean garment and prays according to one's best judgment. And Allah Azza wa Jal, or the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إِذَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مُسْتَطَعْتُمْ. If I command you to do something, then do as much you are able. And the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, لَا تُصَلُّوا صَلَاةً فِي يَوْمٍ مَرَّتين. Do not pray the same prayer twice in one day. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. Allah does not burden us all more than He can bear. La shak, this is a hardship that you have to pray in all of these forms. Hatta the madhab, they say, if you can't differentiate, or you don't know at all which one's pure, which one's impure, then you pray in all of the forms, even if it's a lot. And la shak, the thing that is a hardship. With that, ya ikhwata, we have concluded what is connected or pertains to the rulings of water. And in reality, you can summarize it all in two sentences, according to what is the most strong opinion, Allahu A'lam. And that is that water is tahur. So any water we find, we use, unless something impure falls into it. Unless something impure falls into it and changes its color, taste, and smell, then it is not permissible to use it. But that's the khulasa, and that's the summary of what is the strong opinion of Allah A'lam. That water is tahur. So any water we find, we use it. Unless something impure falls into it and changes its color, taste, or smell, then it is not permissible to use it. Now, so inshallah ta'ala, our next lesson will be next Wednesday. For this whole week, there will be no lessons because of Eid. And we'll start inshallah the week after on Wednesday, inshallah ta'ala. As for questions, and I realized questions at the end of class will be difficult. For those who know me, when I answer questions, I tend to go in detail. Sometimes we end up speaking about one question for over an hour, and that's something I can't change. Allah musta'an. And of course, everyone's busy. So I think what is best when it comes to questions, especially if I know there's going to be a lot of questions, is I'm aware that the brothers have a group chat and the sisters also have a group chat. If the mudir or the one that is in the head of the group chats, if you can bring all the questions together, anyone who has questions, anyone has questions, maybe you can answer the question yourself, from the students that are there. Maybe they know the answers, the student. If no one knows the answer, and it's confusing everyone, then give the questions to the admin of the group, and then they can send it to us, inshallah ta'ala. And perhaps I will answer it by voice note if that's okay, inshallah ta'ala, because it's very difficult for me to find time to type up the answers. And this is why I find it very difficult to answer on emails because of typing. But what I'll do is I'll send a voice note, inshallah ta'ala, that can be passed on to each group, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, to answer the questions. And if I don't know the answer, as I mentioned many times, we're not shy of saying that we don't know the answer. وفي الحقيقة أنا أبتعد عن الأجوبة. أنا I don't even like to answer questions, لكن للأسف يعني المسؤولية. But if it's the case I don't know the answer, alhamdulillah we have contacts with the scholars and our mashayikh from the likes of Sheikh Sulaiman Ruhaili, Sheikh Abdul Mussin, and other than them, the mashayikh, you can message inshallah ta'ala and ask them directly بإذن الله تعالى. بارك الله في الجميع وفقه الله في الجميع والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى الله على نبينا وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.